Bill, I read through your letter over the weekend, and what I noticed in the tone was that you are very optimistic. You say, look, we are better off than we were decades ago. Where does this optimism come from?
Well, I think I'm naturally optimistic, but also I think the facts are on the side of the optimists, and I think it's actually dangerous that people are focusing on the bad news and not seeing the progress we've made. It means they don't look at the best practices. It makes them less generous. We are raising poor countries up. Most people live in middle-income countries now. There's more to be done on health and agriculture, but the track record of success, if you don't see that, you're not going to participate in what we need to do.
And you say that there will be no poor nations by the time we reach 2035.
Almost none. Landlocked countries in Africa, North Korea, if they don't change the government, but it'll be less than 10, which when I was born, almost all countries were poor. Now we're down to about a quarter of them. So the next 20 years, if we focus on it, we can make it really, really exceptional.
Well, as you had mentioned in your letter, not everyone should have the luck of the ovarian lottery, which is what Warren Buffett has talked about. Mike, you donated last year about $100 million to the Bill Gates Foundation to eradicate polio from this world. Do you share this same optimism as Bill?
Yeah, I couldn't be more in agreement. I think one of the things people miss is that advocates seldom want to acknowledge success, because they always want to have more to do, raise more money, be more important. But Bill's 100% right. There are fewer people starving, fewer people sleeping without a roof over their head, fewer people that are illiterate. Life expectancy is generally longer. By any rational measure, things are better. Now, that doesn't mean every place or every person, and there'll always be a bottom 20%, and we'll always redefine what the bottom 20% means. But to say that all of the foreign aid and all of the monies, for example, that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Bloomberg or lots of other generous people have invested, it hasn't done anything, that's just not true at all. We have a guy, Tony Harries, a doctor in Africa, who's trying to get numbers and find out what people are dying from. Because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, you can't fix it. And we don't know. A lot of times you look at birth certificates, it'll say act of God. Well, that doesn't tell you where you want to put your money to save people's lives. But Bill and Melinda working on polio, there's the chance of really eradicating this disease like smallpox, or both of us working on malaria, or things like vitamin A deficiency that cause 500,000 people to go blind permanently every year. There's an awful lot of new science, new ways of distributing, and progress.
Why do you think, though, Mike, that people don't want to admit that there is that success?
Well, number one, we always see a few people, and you have to put it in context. And unless you can step back and look at the big picture, we're talking about eradicating something or changing something. When there's 6 or so billion people on the planet, the 25 people that you interact with during the course of the day is hardly representative. And there are these old beliefs that you're wasting your money with this or that, and that's just not true. And I think one of the great things about Bill and Melinda is they've never shied away of taking on the impossible tasks. And it turns out that complex problems don't have simple answers. If they did, they would have been solved. But the complex problems aren't unsolvable either.
Bill, what's going to be the catalyst to change people's minds? Because you want to debunk these myths, right? Foreign aid is a waste, for instance, or that poor countries will stay poor. What is going to be the catalyst to change people's perceptions fundamentally?
Well, I think we want people to spread the word. People should feel great about the arrow of time, but feel bad that we're not doing more. And headlines, in a way, are what mislead you, because bad news is a headline and gradual improvement is not. And so when do we celebrate reduction in malaria deaths? When do we celebrate GDP growth? We almost have to take a letter like this and speak out and say, wait a minute, despite how bad we feel about what's not yet done, we have some approaches that work, and the cynicism is holding us back. People who think a lot of aid goes to corruption, they also think aid is a big part of the budget. It's less than 1%, but if you ask people, they'll say 25% or certainly above 10%.
Well, and one of the myths about foreign aid, or one of the perceptions, as you say, is that so much aid goes to governments, let's say in Africa, and that they waste that aid, or that it gives corrupt regimes a pass to not doing the things that they need to do. What do you say to that?
Well, historically, during the Cold War, there was a lot of money that was labeled aid that was really friendship money to make sure the bad guy was our bad guy versus the Soviets' bad guy. And so nobody expected that the human lives would improve dramatically there. Now, we don't have that agenda. Now we can go in and say, what will this do for nutrition? What will this do for kids to fully develop physically and mentally, and help these countries be self-sufficient? And so many have graduated from aid, Mexico, Brazil, that now we're focusing on the tough cases, but with the right vaccines, the right seeds, and philanthropists coming in with their business-like mentality that Mike and I have. I think every year we're going to be smarter about how we do it.
Also, when you have big problems and you say you've solved them, that doesn't mean you got 100% of them. If you have, we brought smoking down in a good part of this world dramatically. That'll save an enormous number of lives. Having said that, there's also places where the smoking industry has managed to get poor people who don't know that it's bad for their health to increase their rate of smoking. Are you making progress? Yes. Should you be disappointed? No. Should you walk away from it? Not at all. And the Gates Foundation and Bloomberg, we've worked together to that's one of the biggest killers. The smoking will kill 1 billion people this century. But we've made progress, and you have to admit that, and you have to look at what works. And if you're not willing to acknowledge what works, you're not going to be able to know how to go help others. Have
you been surprised, though, at the turnaround in the public view on issues like smoking, on issues like obesity, for instance, and even now marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, and how rapidly people's perceptions have changed about those?
Well, we still have a long ways to go, but if you take a look, these companies, like the tobacco companies, target those that don't know, don't have the information, don't have the infrastructure or the history, or doctors locally who can give them advice as to how to improve their lives and extend their lives. And so much of the tragedy in this world is self-inflicted. It's not, there are wars, there is genocide, there's starvation and people getting shot all the time, but most of the people die before they should because of their own behavior, and that's what we have to work on, and educating them, giving them the tools, explaining and counteracting the special interests who make money by selling them products or getting them to do things that are dangerous to themselves.
What about cities, Mike, and their role?
Well, cities are where you distribute services. Federal governments and state governments tend to move monies around. Cities are where you pick up the garbage, where you educate the kids, where you bring down crime, where you enact health measures that you can actually see what you can buy, how it's labeled, where you can use it, those kinds of things. And I think if you take a look at most of the progress that's been made in climate change, for example, has all been done at the city level. Very little is done, even in this country, when we're fighting guns, when we're fighting obesity, when we're trying to improve the school systems and bring down crime. Those are not done at the federal or state level. Those really are done at the city level.
Bill, I've always wanted to know this from you. You have such a huge arsenal. Both of you have a huge arsenal of resources. How do you pick the causes that you get behind?
Well, globally, I think the greatest inequity is how poor children don't get to grow up and achieve their potential. Either they die or they simply don't have enough food that their brain develops. And so we've decided that most of the money is going to go to that cause. Unfortunately, there are things like new vaccines that will help those kids, avoid them getting sick, and we're seeing the progress. 5% of kids now die before the age of 5. The prediction is we can get that down to 1.6% and match where the United States was in 1980. And so it's because it's this injustice, because a lot of these things weren't being done at the level they should be. And once you pick an area, you develop expertise, you go out and see the people, and that's going to be our lifelong work.
But did someone trigger you, to think about this area, or was it just something that lifelong you've always
Well, I
been
think he
interested
listens to his wife. Melinda has a lot of good ideas. For example, maternal health. That's really all
Yes.
her bag, and we've been doing a number of things under her guidance and to try to advance the causes of getting the kids so they can get born and survive the first couple days and then the next 5 years. But there's lots of good ideas. And you just have to look. You can't do everything. You have to decide what your core competencies are, whether you want to do it internally. And like the Bill and Melinda Foundation, in a lot of cases, they administer funds. And in other cases, they give funds. In our case, we probably do more donating funds and having others administer it. But we have a big group that's working on a lot of the public health issues internally as well.
Well, Mike, when you were mayor, I mean, you had certain metrics by which you could measure
Yes.
the success of your own projects and initiatives. So when you give money, how do you measure success?
Well, number one, not everything's going to work quickly, so you have to have some patience. Number two, if you do something in the scientific world and it turns out to be a failure, that in some sense is a success because you don't have to go down that path again. Unfortunately, in the world I came from, you're labeled a failure and you wasted your money. Right.
Yep.
That's not the case the way science works. And so knowing what you're doing, measuring it, and there are a lot of people around who are trying to apply metrics. In some cases you can, in some cases you just have to do it on faith. I know down the road this is going to help and I'm willing to make that bet. And then wait a little while, give it the old college try. If it doesn't work, don't be stubborn, but don't walk away from it too quickly either.
How about you, Bill?
Well, each project's got to come in with a commitment. Like our smoking groups come in and talk us about how we're going to get the prevalence down. Mike's group has led the way on that, and it's going very, very well. We back in the science area, we back a lot of different scientists. So even if one approach fails, if it's an important problem, then we've got 3 or 4. It's a portfolio type approach. And the successes you have, like we've had some new seeds where the farming productivity has doubled. That gives you a belief to just keep trying because you get to go out to the countries and actually meet the people who are growing more rice than they ever did before.
Well, with the private money, I mean, you do have that luxury of, as you say, Mike, that you can experiment. You can see what works, and if it doesn't work, you move on to another.
Well, you can do a lot of things
Yes.
with private money you cannot do with public money. My daughter works with a group of people, the Robin Hood Foundation, and they try a lot of new things. Their interest is local education and
Right.
that sort of thing. But if we didn't have private money, you'd still have the old masters because government would have said, I wouldn't invest in impressionism. That's not art. It's the private monies that have, through history, have been willing to try new things, have an instinct that something's going to work where they can't prove it, but are willing to make that bet. And that's how progress is made.
Now, you two are old friends, and you work together, but you're also very good personal friends. I know, Mike, you're going to be heading off to Africa soon, right? As part of a global mayors conference. And Bill, you've been to Africa numerous times in your in your foundation's work. What advice do you have for Mike when he goes to Africa? What do you think he should see there?
Well, my wife, Melinda, and daughter are spending the week there out on a farm. Getting down to see these projects is exciting. Mike's been super generous on malaria research, so I hope he'll feel good going in and seeing that the death rate is down, seeing what more has to be done, and talking to the people on the ground there about which tools are hard to deliver, which are easy to deliver. Africa's fantastic. The cities need a lot of help. The scientific research needs a lot of help, and that's why I think both of us are drawn more and more of our philanthropy will help those countries that have great needs.
One of the places that Melinda has 50,000 people per doctor. In America, we have 500 people per doctor. There are places there where there are no roads, so that if you need an operation, emergency operation, you just die. And we've been training people to do appendectomies and cesareans, which turn out to be relatively simple operations. But without that, everybody that needed one of those is not going to survive. And yet, with a little help, working, you're not going to cure everything, you're not going to be able to do open heart surgery, but you can do a few things, and that can make an enormous difference and save countless lives.
What do you hope to do there, or to see there, or accomplish in Africa, Mike?
Well, the organization that I'm participating in is a group of 63 cities that focus on climate change, sharing best practices and that sort of thing. But they all have the same problems. They all have to educate and protect and improve the health of people, and all through Africa and Latin America and Asia and Europe and America. We all have very similar problems. Some of them are of different magnitudes, some involve different diseases, but you don't have to go very far from right where we're sitting. Just go to Haiti and look at the terrible tragedy that's taking place there. The world pledged all this money, and yet they're still there with diseases that I thought were eradicated, and living in tents, and not having the ability to be in charge of their own destiny and feed their families. And we've just got to get together and do things about it.
You know, many people watching this interview are big admirers of your work. I'm curious to know who you admire. Are there thought leaders that you look up to?
Well, we learn from each other.
Yes.
We've actually are both early members of a group called the Giving Pledge, where a lot of philanthropists sit and share mistakes. You know, there's people like George Soros, who's done really innovative work. We get to meet the scientists work on this stuff. Maybe the most amazing are the people out in the field who, you know, spend big parts of their life in Africa taking these tools that we help back and making sure they get out there.
Yeah, they're also, I think you have to separate people's political interests from their willingness to help. I mean, there are some, Soros is clearly a liberal, I think it's a fair way to say it. The Koch brothers are clearly very conservative, but the Koch brothers have given enormous money to different hospitals and tried to improve lives.
And you say give them credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to agree with everything everybody does, but I don't know if I agree with either side of those two. But I think that they all deserve credit, and there's just an awful lot of people. And also there are a lot of people who aren't billionaires, who aren't even millionaires, who write small checks or give their time and go out there and work and lobby their elected officials to take government money and try to improve the health of everybody. And they deserve an enormous amount of credit as well.
Well, maybe that feeds in also to, Bill, what you were talking about with these misperceptions. Some people feel that their lives haven't improved. The average American feels their life has not improved. So how can they care about the problems that you're talking about?
Right. Yeah, the question is, are you willing to spend a little less than 1% on saving lives for a few $1,000s per life? The European governments tend to be about twice as generous on these 8 issues as the United States is. So they've set a good example, even the UK making increases. But it's a political decision, and if this cynicism, if the lack of understanding that really good things are happening is out there, then the voters aren't going to be willing. Recently, in the budget compromise, polio got an extra $50 million a year. So, you know, some progress has been made on something where we have very clear targets. In that case, by 2018, completely eradicating the disease.
Also, it's very self-serving as well. If you cure a disease elsewhere, then you're not likely to catch that disease. And we live in a world where diseases can spread very easily. We want stability around the world. That is self-serving because our safety depends on a world that doesn't start wars and gets along, and there's a compassionate part of this. We have an obligation to stop genocide, and I think that you come back to right where we started with this interview. Things are better. We can make a difference. You're not going to cure everything overnight or even ever. But to sit back and say, oh, it's hopeless, that's not true. It's like one of the things that in Bill's letter he points out, the better educated people don't overpopulate the world, quite the contrary.
Yep.
A lot of poor people have lots of kids because they don't think they'll survive. And there's not going to be a breadwinner down the road to take care of them in their dotage. And if everybody's healthier, it just leads to a much more rational world and lets us deal with the real problems.
Bill, you know, people know you and know your work as a philanthropist, but they also know you as the founder of Microsoft, and you're still the chairman of that company. How involved are you on a day-to-day basis with Microsoft?
Well, I'm on the board, and the board's doing some important work right now. The foundation is the biggest part of my time, but then, you know, I put part-time work in to help as a board member.
Are you involved at all, or how involved are you with the search for the new chief executive?
No, the board's working on that. There's nothing new to say, but you know, it's a good board.
Do you feel a sense of urgency at all? Does the board feel a sense of urgency on this front?
Yeah, I think you'd always feel that way. Then again, you want to, pick the best person. So, they'll move at the right pace.
We had the fortune of having the mayor come back to this company, and we're very happy to have him back at Bloomberg. Bill, has that ever hit your vision in the future of ever going back to Microsoft full time?
Well, my full-time work will be the foundation for the rest of my life. My wife Melinda are enjoying that. I get to do it in depth. So I'm not going to change that. Although I'll help out part-time.
Mike, tell me how you think, in the 12 years that you have been in public office, technology, the industry itself has changed dramatically. New pioneers that are following the footsteps of Bill Gates. Give me your take on the state of technology and how you
Well, technology is an enabler, technology is a tool, but I think the basics really haven't changed. Education, business, philanthropy is still about people looking each other in the eye, listening to each other, working collaboratively and collectively. And you've got to be very careful and think that, not to think that technology is going to do everything for you. Ethics matter, competency, the education of our kids is the most important thing. There's enormous changes in the job prospects for people at every level, and some are going to lead us down the path with some very severe problems. But nevertheless, the first and most important thing is every kid getting a good education. And in some parts of the world they understand that, and in some parts of the world they don't. And sadly in America we don't seem to. We keep falling in these rankings. We used to be in the top 10. Now we're lucky to be in the top 30. That does not bode well for our future, and we've just got to pull together, get away from this partisan stuff, and start devoting the resources we need if we're going to have a future.
Well, and Bill, you are passionate as well about training our young people, particularly in computer science, that there's not enough training there.
Yeah, I think education is a topic Mike and I think is incredibly important, and we've been willing to create some controversy saying that let's help teachers be better, let's try out new approaches. The status quo is pretty unsatisfactory, and technology is going to help, particularly for that motivated learner. But how do you create the motivation broadly? That's mostly a human problem, and helping the teacher do it as best possible.
And just on a final note, Bill, tell me what you think about the state of the technology industry now, and how the new crop of leaders, how you see them.
Well, the rate of innovation is faster than ever. Things like understanding speech and vision, taking large amounts of data and understanding that, big high-resolution screens that'll be on your walls in the office at home. So we're really in a fantastic period where finding information, understanding information is going to get a lot better, and that will lead to productivity. We can simulate things so that new product design and innovation could go faster. We see it in biology, even understanding complex systems and what drugs should be tried out. So I'm a great believer that whether it's helping the poorest or just helping the global economy, technology can solve a lot of problems.
You just go back and look at what people predicted a few years ago, and they were so far wrong. I mean, almost everything they predicted has been done, and yet in the next 2 or 3 years, we will improve technology more than was done from the beginning of inventing electricity till today.
It's been exponential.
Exponential,
yes.
And the disruption. There's no industry that's not going to have to adjust and change. Some will do it successfully, some won't. Some people are going to have better jobs. Some people are going to have to find ways to make sure that they're included. We shouldn't walk away from it, but it is going to be a very serious problem, and it's not just an American problem. It's a problem around the world, particularly in the middle where an awful lot of automation is taking place. That gives you cheaper, better products, but it also employs fewer people, and we've got to find ways to get everybody involved.